COVID-19, and it may prove a little dated, but I want our listeners to understand exactly where our problems with the pollution of our land, water, and air really got a big boost. It's called voodoo environmentalism. Since Ronald Reagan became President of the United States, he has attempted to sabotage government agencies that were created to protect the public. This is most evident in the Environmental Protection Agency. EPA was founded in 1970 by President Richard Nixon. It was set up to protect us from pollution by cracking down on companies responsible for contaminating the nation's air, water, and soil. But EPA never had the money or the manpower to do its job. EPA has always been a token agency designed to quiet growing public outcries against polluters. It takes action only when a toxic waste problem becomes too blatant to conceal, like Love Canal. So industry continues to dump millions of tons of lethal chemicals into our environment, and these could ultimately destroy all life on Earth. Around the time the Reagan administration came to power, Congress amended the Resource Conservation Act of 1976, making it easier to track the existence and eventual disposal of hazardous chemical wastes. In 1980, Congress also enacted the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, which created a $1.6 billion hazardous substance response trust fund, the Superfund, to pay for the cleanup of thousands of sites containing dangerous chemicals. But ongoing investigations by Congress revealed that Reagan's EPA is coddling the chemical industry. It has done little to enforce the aforementioned laws, and it doesn't give a damn about the environment. The controversy began last December when Reagan ordered EPA's head administrator, Ann Gorsuch, to withhold documents dealing with the agency's use of the Superfund in cleaning up hazardous waste sites from two House committees. Reagan claimed executive privilege and said the Justice Department advised him that release of the documents would jeopardize government lawsuits against polluters. His rhetoric did not work. On December 16th, the House of Representatives voted 259 to 105 to cite Gorsuch for contempt of Congress, the highest official in history to be so charged. Contempt of Congress is a criminal misdemeanor. If indicted by a federal grand jury and convicted in U.S. District Court, and Gorsuch could be fined up to $1,000 or could go to jail for 1 year or both. Representative James J. Howard, Democrat of New Jersey, chairman of the Public Works and Transportation Committee, and Representative Elliot H. Levitas, Democrat, Georgia, chairman of the Public Works Subcommittee on Investigations, which recommended the citation, suspected that hundreds of documents were being sanitized in case they had to be given to Congress. Representative James Florio, Democrat of New Jersey, chairman of the Transportation Subcommittee, and Representative John Dingell, Democrat of Michigan, chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, are also investigating EPA. Florio a principal author of the Superfund law, wants federal records dealing with 18 toxic waste dumps in New Jersey. While Dingell is looking into the details of EPA's cleanup of 5 additional sites. Florio also warned that Attorney General William French Smith could be impeached for refusing to prosecute the contempt of Congress citation against Ann Gorsuch. Florio said, "I'm incensed when the chief law enforcement officer of the United States says he's not going to follow the law, which he says he must take this contempt citation to the grand jury." Meanwhile, the counsel for the House demanded information concerning 2 EPA paper shredders that might have been used illegally on evenings and weekends to destroy many of the documents sought by Congress. Representative John F. Seiberling, Democrat of Ohio, who participated in the impeachment proceedings against President Nixon, said, "The Gorsuch case has a very familiar ring: stonewalling and covering up." On February 7, 1983, President Reagan tried to whitewash EPA's battle with Congress by firing Rita Lavelle, the deputy administrator directly responsible for managing the $1.6 billion Superfund. The Superfund works like this. EPA pays 90% of the cleanup costs, and the states pay the rest. Then EPA sues the companies responsible for dumping to recover expenses and to reimburse the fund. However, Rita Lavelle made sweetheart deals with offending companies by negotiating out-of-court settlements that allowed them to reimburse the Superfund with much less than what they should have paid. Lavelle also ignored Congress's demand that she monitor health conditions around dumping sites. She also chastised EPA personnel for conducting thorough investigations, and she allowed chemical industry lobbyists to wine and dine her at Washington's most expensive restaurants. Gorsuch approved Lavelle's actions, which is why Reagan censored the incriminating documents. Lavelle was fired for stupidity. She wrote an unsigned memo which criticized Agency General Counsel Robert Perry for being too quick to sue companies responsible for pollution. Lavelle wrote, Perry, is systematically alienating the primary constituents of this administration, the business community. At a press conference several days after the memo was written, Gorsuch said, "I view the American people as our major constituents." Someone lied, and it wasn't Lavelle. Reagan went on television on February 16, 1983, and promised to give Congress the documents it wanted. Reagan said, "I can no longer insist on executive privilege if there's a suspicion in the minds of the people that maybe it's being used to cover wrongdoing." Hours later, the White House spokesman, Larry Speakes, insisted that Reagan had not abandoned executive privilege, explaining that EPA records would be submitted to the Justice Department, which will decide whether it is necessary to make them available to Congress. On March 9th, Reagan finally succumbed to intensifying political pressure and turned the documents over to Congress. But he made an agreement with Representative John Dingell that sensitive information be restricted from public disclosure. This is censorship, by the way. That's my interjection. Among the surrendered EPA documents were handwritten notes that showed that the White House used Superfund money to influence the outcome of political elections. According to the notes, a White House meeting between James Midas, presidential assistant for Intergovernmental Affairs, and EPA officials Rita Lavelle and Susan Valdivia occurred on 7/13/1982. At this meeting, the political races in several states were discussed, and phrases like bend over backwards and help him all we can were used. It's not surprising that EPA became more inept and corrupt under Ronald Reagan than under previous administrations. Reagan was elected because he promised to get government off the backs of industry. This was putting the fox in charge of the henhouse. Like most of Reagan's appointees, the personnel of EPA are against what the agency stands for. Rita Lavelle was director of communications at Aerojet Liquid Rocket Company of California. She dealt with the media when California charged Aerojet with polluting Sacramento's water supply. Aerojet was one of the many companies that dumped chemical wastes into the Stringfellow acid pits, one of the nation's worst toxic waste dumps. When Lavelle joined EPA, she tried to absolve Aerojet of financial responsibility for the Stringfellow dump. Lavelle is being charged with conflict of interest, contempt of Congress for not showing up at committee hearings, and perjury for the times she did appear. Ann Gorsuch was a corporate lawyer and an assemblywoman in the Colorado state legislature. Several EPA officials served there with Gorsuch. They were known as the House Crazies. Since 1979, they voted against measures aimed at controlling toxic waste dumps. After appointing these militant conservatives to chair key committees, House Speaker Robert Burford assigned major anti-pollution bills to Gorsuch's state affairs committees, where they died. This happened so often that other state legislators nicknamed Gorsuch's committee the Killing Ground. Editor's note: Robert Burford is now the director of the Bureau of Land Management in James Watt's Interior Department. Gorsuch married Burford later, before she resigned from the EPA. Other EPA officials who resigned were John W. Hernandez, Jr., the deputy administrator who ran EPA when Gorsuch resigned. Hernandez resigned when Congress released documents showing that he allowed Dow Chemical Company to alter a 1981 report that accused the company of contaminating two of Michigan's rivers with dioxin. Louis J. Cordia, deputy director of EPA's Office of Federal Activities, resigned when a congressional subcommittee confirmed that he compiled a hit list of personnel to be promoted or fired based on their political leanings. Before resigning, Dr. John Todd Hunter was in charge of controlling toxic substances. Todd Hunter ordered his staff to alter studies in order to make dioxin and formaldehyde look safer. EPA's worst bureaucrat was Steve Durham. This former Young Americans for Freedom activist masterminded the 1979 takeover of the Colorado State Legislature by Robert Burford. Until last April, Durham headed EPA's Denver Regional Office, which monitors pollution in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana. Durham resigned due to charges from environmentalists and his staff that he suppressed scientific findings and did nothing to clean up hazardous waste sites within his jurisdiction. Durham also labeled congressional probes of EPA hysteria, saying no toxic dumps pose serious dangers to human health, and dared critics to give me a list of one person who has died as a result of a hazardous waste site. Residents of Fraser, Tennessee, and Providence Valley, Maryland, would be glad to put their names on Durham's list. For years, people in these towns have suffered from headaches, nausea, vomiting, chest pains, skin rashes, respiratory problems, and high cancer rates due to nearby chemical waste dumps. Children died of leukemia. Dogs kept in backyards lost their fur and went deaf. Violet and red liquids gurgled up out of the ground. Foul odors filled the air. Similar symptoms were reported by people who lived near Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York, the site of the abandoned dump used by Hooker Chemical Company from 1942 to 1953. If we continue to tolerate bureaucrats like Durham, our environment will be poisoned beyond repair. Each year, the chemical industry produces 350 billion pounds of chemicals, pesticides, solvents, heavy metals. Some of these concoctions are as toxic as plutonium. Many of them can last in the environment for 100 years. Since World War II, these toxic chemicals have been carelessly dumped at over 14,000 different sites across the United States. After being sealed in metal drums, the wastes were usually buried in large ground pits. And unscrupulous firms hired truckers, midnight dumpers, who just threw the stuff along the roadsides, into creeks, anywhere that was convenient. Some midnight dumpers will lease property and store the drums until the site is filled or until the law cracks down. Then they will abandon the place and leave the mess behind. The metal drums soon rot, and the chemicals inside ooze out like a creeping death. Once these chemical wastes escaped into the environment, they found their way into the groundwater and contaminated thousands of aquifers. Fish taken from our rivers have been declared unfit to eat due to contamination with PCBs. In one of their own studies, EPA took samples of mother's milk nationwide and found that over 33% of the women had PCBs in their milk. The legacy for their babies is liver damage or an early cancer. Reporter Michael Brown, who covered the Love Canal disaster, points out that once those toxic elements get out there, who knows how far they're going to go. I have read in scientific journals that PCBs have been found in non-migratory birds and bears within the Arctic Circle, and also in the ice of Antarctica. Before resigning, Ann Gorsuch tried to defend EPA's dismal record before congressional opponents by saying, "I challenge them to look at the facts." The facts are that EPA's personnel and resources were reduced after Congress broadened its powers to fight pollution. In 1981, there was a 79% decline in cases referred to EPA headquarters from its regional offices and a 69% decrease in cases referred to the Justice Department. As for actual cleanups, of the 419 toxic waste dumps, 67 are in New Jersey, that EPA listed as most dangerous, only 15 have been cleaned up. Moreover, there are doubts concerning the effectiveness of those cleanup efforts. With Gorsuch and other top EPA officials gone, Reagan appointed William D. Ruckelshaus to run EPA. The Senate confirmed him 97-0. On May 17, 1983, Ruckelshaus was EPA's original administrator from 1970 to 1973 under President Nixon. He was later moved to the Justice Department, where he served as a Deputy Attorney General. To his credit, Nixon fired Ruckelshaus in Watergate's Saturday Night Massacre because he refused to fire Watergate's Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. As head of EPA, Ruckelshaus was known as a tough and independent regulator who steered a middle course between environmentalists and industrialists. But even Ruckelshaus is flawed. After leaving the government, Ruckelshaus set up a Washington law firm that defended chemical companies against EPA. For the last 7 years, Ruckelshaus was senior vice president of the Weyerhaeuser Company, earning $221,000 a year. Weyerhaeuser, a giant paper and lumber company, is ranked in the top 5 among the nation's worst polluters. Prior to his confirmation hearings, the Senate's Environment Committee found 2 1981 letters written by Ruckelshaus to Vice President George Bush. The letters criticized Congress's efforts to regulate industrial polluters. It is doubtful that Ruckelshaus will improve EPA. If he tries, Reagan will not hesitate to fire him. Throughout the EPA scandal, Reagan continued to insist that he wants a clean environment. Reagan must take us for fools to think that changing administrative personnel will cover up his efforts to ruin the Environmental Protection Agency. Don't be surprised if House committees investigating the Environmental Protection Agency open a Pandora's box of lying and chicanery that erupts into another Watergate, forcing Reagan and other polluted personalities in his administration to resign. The stench is already overpowering. Well, that didn't happen. And today we have George W. Bush and his environmental protection cronies protecting big business. And as we say here often, it goes on and on and on. Nothing changes. The end.
Hi, this is William Morrow. Are you one of those people who join a health club, and after they have your big, overpriced annual membership, you notice that you're on your own with little or no results even after all the promises? Then the website Personal Trainer is for you.
Thank you very much, William H. Morrow III.
So you lost another argument with a conservative, right-wing Republican. He talked over you. He screamed and yelled. He brought out the Bible. He thumped it. He quoted scripture to you. You were lost because you came at him with facts. Nothing but facts. And you expected that would make you look good, that would make you win the argument, but it didn't. You know why you lost the argument? You know why you're going to lose your next argument? Because you don't read Censored. Censored, a 30-year-old newsletter that shows you how to defeat a conservative. Read Censored, and you'll have all the ammunition you need. Every time you get into an argument with a right-wing conservative, so-called Christian. Censored. That's all you need. Read it and defeat a conservative.
Greetings, listeners. Let me speak to you for a moment about the foundation of our entire organization, Newsletters Censored. It was founded by our mentor, the Reverend Dr. William J. Eisenman, in 1977. It discusses the 5 taboos of American life: politics, religion, health, human sexuality, and child rearing. You won't find anything like this in the mainstream media and the press. It reveals the kind of truth that most people are afraid to hear. Can you handle it? We are living in the end times, so in order to defeat a conservative and save America, you need Newsletters Censored. Go to www.newslettercensored.com, click on the printable order form page, and with your gift to support this work, get your free annual subscription. This is James P. Madonna of Megalife 21, the hardest hitting internet talk radio station on the planet.